All right, let's talk about buildings. Not just any buildings. We're talking about houses of worship. Across the globe, something fascinating is happening to them. Think of it like a massive, slow-motion architectural swap meet. In the United States, new mosques are popping up at an impressive rate. It's a sign of a growing, vibrant Muslim community. We're seeing a significant rise in these sacred spaces, reflecting a changing American religious landscape. This isn't just about bricks and mortar. It's about demographic shifts, community building, and the evolving face of faith in the nation. The numbers are pretty clear on this trend. Meanwhile, hop across the Atlantic to Europe, and you'll see a different story unfolding. Churches, many of them centuries old, are closing their doors. Attendance is dwindling. What was once the bedrock of community life is now in many places becoming a relic. These aren't just small forgotten chapels either. We're talking about significant structures right in the heart of cities and towns. The reasons are complex, ranging from changing societal values to disillusionment with religious institutions. It's a profound transformation with deep cultural implications for the continent. So, you've got these two major trends, almost mirror images of each other. On one side of the pond, a religious community is visibly expanding its footprint. On the other, a once dominant religious tradition is contracting, leaving behind physical spaces that need new purpose. It's a tale of two continents, each grappling with its own unique spiritual and demographic currents. This isn't just a niche religious story. It's about how societies change, how cultures evolve, and how the very skylines of our cities reflect these deep-seated transformations. This essay is going to dive into that. We'll look at why mosques are on the rise in the US, often in surprising places like former churches. Then we'll explore why Europe is seeing so many churches go silent and what creative, sometimes wild things people are doing with these empty sacred spaces. It's about demographics, culture, belief, and disbelief. It's about how communities are adapting to these shifts. So buckle up, because we're about to unpack a fascinating global phenomenon that says a lot about where we've been and where we might be headed. Let's get into the nitty-gritty in the good old US of A. The number of mosques? It's been climbing, and not just by a little. We're talking a 31% increase in the decade leading up to 2020. That brought the total count to 2,769 mosques across the country. Think about that. That's a significant jump. Back in the year 2000, there were 1,209 mosques. So in 2 decades, the number more than doubled. This isn't accidental. It's a direct reflection of a community establishing its presence and catering to its growing numbers. This growth isn't just happening in the traditional big cities anymore either, though they still lead. For instance, New York had the most mosques in 2020, with 343, which itself was a 33% increase from 2010. But here's an interesting twist. There's been a major shift towards suburban areas. In 2010, about 20% of mosques were in cities. By 2020, that number dropped to just 6%. This suggests a community that's not only growing, but also spreading out, integrating into different kinds of American landscapes and neighborhoods. And who is filling these mosques? Well, young adults, those aged 18 to 34, made up about a quarter of mosque participants in 2020. This indicates a youthful and active demographic is engaged with these religious centers. Furthermore, the infrastructure supporting these mosques is also maturing. The proportion of mosques with a full-time paid imam rose to 50% in 2020. That's up from 43% in 2010. This signals a move towards more established, professionally run institutions capable of serving their congregations effectively. However, it's not all straightforward expansion in every aspect. For instance, the average number of converts to Islam per mosque actually saw a decrease. It went from 15.3 converts per mosque in 2010 down to 11.3 in 2020. There was a notable decline, particularly among African American converts. This suggests that while the overall community is growing, primarily through other means, the rate of conversion at individual mosques has lessened. It's a complex picture, but the overwhelming narrative is one of significant growth and evolution for American mosques. So, what's fueling this impressive growth of mosques and the Muslim population in the United States? It's not just one thing. It's a combination of factors. A primary driver is immigration. People from various Muslim-majority countries have been making the U.S. their home for decades, and this continues to contribute to the community's expansion. They bring their faith, their cultures, and their desire to establish places of worship and community centers. This is a classic American story, really, new communities arriving and building their institutions. Another significant factor is the birth rate within the Muslim American community. Generally, birth rates among Muslim Americans have been higher compared to some other religious groups in the U.S. This naturally leads to an organic growth of the population from one generation to the next. More children mean more families looking for religious education and community spaces, which in turn fuels the demand for more mosques. The U.S. Muslim population is estimated to have grown from around 2.35 million in 2007 to about 3.85 million by 2020. That's a substantial increase. The way these new mosques are established is also part of the story. Funding often comes from within the community, from wealthy Muslim individuals or sometimes from Islamic countries that support the establishment of religious institutions abroad. These mosques are often strategically placed in areas with growing Muslim populations, making them accessible community hubs. It's a grassroots effort combined with organized planning. This proactive approach ensures that as the community grows, the infrastructure to support its religious and social needs grows alongside it. It's important to note that while the community is growing, it's also diverse. American Muslims come from all over the world, bringing a rich tapestry of ethnic and cultural backgrounds. This diversity is reflected in the mosques themselves, each with its own unique character. Despite this growth, public understanding of Islam and Muslims in the U.S. still has a ways to go. Many Americans report knowing little about the faith, and unfortunately, experiences of discrimination are still reported by a significant portion of Muslim Americans. This makes the role of mosques as community anchors even more vital. Now here's where things get really interesting in the U.S. The phenomenon of repurposing. As some Christian denominations in America see declining attendance, some of their church buildings become vacant. At the same time, the Muslim community is growing and needs space. What happens next? Sometimes these former churches get a new spiritual lease on life. They are bought and transformed into mosques. This is a practical solution that's also deeply symbolic of the changing religious tides. Think about it. These buildings were designed for worship. They often have large halls, community rooms, and a certain architectural reverence. For a growing Muslim congregation looking for a suitable and often affordable space, a former church can be an ideal find. It bypasses the often lengthy and expensive process of building a new structure from scratch. This pragmatic approach has contributed to the increase in the number of mosques, particularly in areas where the Muslim population is expanding and established church buildings become available. This trend isn't unique to one specific area, but can be seen across different parts of the country. While detailed national statistics on church-to-mosque conversions are a bit harder to come by comprehensively, anecdotal evidence and reports from various communities highlight this as an ongoing development. It's a story of adaptation and resourcefulness. The physical structure transitions from one faith to another, continuing its role as a spiritual center for a different community. This also means the building remains a place of gathering, rather than becoming derelict or demolished. This repurposing, however, isn't always without its complexities. Sometimes there can be local reactions, both positive and negative. But largely, it's a practical response to demographic realities. It's also a reminder that religious landscapes are not static. They are constantly evolving. The very buildings that once housed Christian congregations, with their pews and pulpits, are now being adapted with prayer rugs and mihrabs, reflecting the shifting spiritual needs of the local population. It's a quiet transformation happening in neighborhoods across America, one building at a time. Section 5. Europe's empty pews. Why church bells toll less often. Let's pivot to Europe. Over there, the story is starkly different. For centuries, Christianity was the dominant religious and cultural force. Churches were at the heart of everything. But now, many Europeans are walking away from traditional organized religion. Church attendance has plummeted, and a growing number of people identify as having no religion at all. This isn't a sudden collapse, but a steady decline that has accelerated in recent decades, leaving many grand historic churches with very few worshippers. One major reason is a perception that Christianity, or at least its traditional institutional forms, is no longer relevant to modern life. Many Europeans feel that the church doesn't speak to their contemporary concerns or values. Society has become more secularized, and for many, religious explanations or guidance feel outdated in an era of science and individualism. This has led to a sort of quiet quitting of the church, where people simply drift away without much fanfare, seeing it as less and less a part of their identity. Then there are the more direct grievances. In some European countries, citizens are required to pay a church tax if they are officially registered as members. As disillusionment grows, more people are formally opting out of church membership to avoid this tax, which directly impacts church finances and their ability to maintain buildings. Furthermore, the Catholic Church and other denominations have been rocked by numerous sexual abuse scandals. These have profoundly damaged trust and credibility, pushing many believers away and making it harder to attract new ones. Finally, there's a perceived lack of genuine connection and community within some congregations. For some, especially younger generations, church services can feel impersonal or out of touch. They might not find the sense of belonging or spiritual fulfillment they seek. As older, more regular churchgoers pass away, younger people are not replacing them in the pews. They are often rejecting the religious beliefs of their parents, or simply finding spirituality, if at all, outside the confines of traditional church structures. This collective disengagement is emptying churches across the continent. Section 6. Counting the closures. The scale of Europe's vanishing churches. The sheer number of church closures across Western Europe is staggering. It's not just a handful here and there, we're talking about a widespread phenomenon. In the Netherlands, for example, Roman Catholic leaders estimated a few years back that 2/3 of their 1,600 churches would likely be out of commission within a decade. That's over 1,000 churches. Protestant churches in the Netherlands faced a similar fate, with an expectation of around 700 closing within about 4 years. In the Dutch province of Friesland alone, 250 out of 720 existing churches had already been transformed or closed. Germany, another European heavyweight, tells a similar tale. The Roman Catholic Church there closed approximately 515 churches in the decade leading up to 2021. That's nearly one church closing every week. The German Evangelical Church, a major Protestant denomination, closed 340 of its churches between 1990 and 2010. These numbers paint a picture of a significant retreat of organized Christianity from public spaces. These aren't just buildings, they are often historical landmarks and symbols of community heritage, now facing an uncertain future. Over in the United Kingdom, the Church of England, the established church, closes about 20 churches annually. While this might seem smaller compared to the German or Dutch numbers, it's a steady, ongoing process of consolidation and closure. Even in Scandinavian countries, known for their high levels of secularism, the impact is felt. In Denmark, for instance, around 200 Danish churches have been deemed non-viable or underused by the Church of Denmark. These are spaces that were once central to life, now struggling to find a congregation. This trend is consistent across much of Western Europe. The reasons are complex, as we've discussed: declining belief, secularization, scandals, and changing demographics. But the outcome is visibly altering the religious and physical landscape of the continent. Communities are left to decide what to do with these often beautiful, historically significant, but now empty sacred buildings. It's a challenge that touches on issues of heritage preservation, community identity, and the evolving role of religion in European society. The numbers are stark and undeniable. Section 7. Beyond Belief, Europe's Churches. Get a secular makeover. So, what happens when a church locks its doors for the last time in Europe? Do these magnificent buildings just crumble? Sometimes. But increasingly, communities and entrepreneurs are getting creative. Really creative. Europe is seeing a wave of innovative repurposing projects that transform these former houses of God into all sorts of secular spaces. It's a fascinating intersection of history, architecture, and modern needs. Some of these transformations are pretty wild, showing just how far society has shifted. Take, for instance, the former Roman Catholic Church of St. Joseph in Arnhem, Netherlands. It wasn't turned into another place of worship. Nope, it became a skate park. Imagine skateboarders doing tricks under vaulted ceilings where hymns once echoed. In Edinburgh, Scotland, a Lutheran church found a new and decidedly spirited life as a Frankenstein-themed bar. Talk about a conversation starter for your Friday night out. These examples show a willingness to completely reimagine the purpose of these historic structures, moving far beyond their original religious intent. The trend continues across the continent. In Spain, a 100-year-old church was also converted into a skate park, with funding from big corporate sponsors like Red Bull. This highlights how even commercial interests are seeing potential in these unique spaces. Back in Germany, the former Church of St. Raphael in Spandau now operates as a grocery store. You can literally buy your bread and milk where parishioners once prayed. In Trier, Karl Marx's hometown, some churches have even been converted into gyms, so you can work on your abs where others sought salvation. And it's not just quirky or utilitarian uses. Some churches are being transformed into high-end properties. In Cologne, Germany, one church became a luxurious residence, complete with a private pool. In Flanders, Belgium, a well-known church was converted into a luxury hotel, cleverly retaining many of the original Catholic architectural elements to offer a unique guest experience. These creative reuse projects, while sometimes controversial, ensure the buildings are maintained and continue to play a role in the community, albeit a very different one than their founders ever envisioned. Section 8. Cultural crosswinds, secular tides, and spiritual quests. These contrasting trends, mosque growth in the United States and church decline in Europe, are not happening in a vacuum. They are deeply intertwined with broader cultural and societal shifts on both continents. In Europe, the dominant story is one of increasing secularization. For generations, a Christian identity was almost a given. Now it's increasingly a choice, and many are choosing to identify as non-religious. This isn't necessarily about a rejection of spirituality altogether, but certainly a move away from traditional institutionalized religion. This European secularization is fueled by various factors. The Enlightenment's emphasis on reason, the rise of scientific understanding, and a growing individualism have all played a part. Moreover, the close historical ties between church and state in many European nations have sometimes led to resentment, especially when combined with mandatory church taxes or perceived political interference by religious institutions. The authority of the church has waned, and its narratives often struggle to find resonance in societies that prioritize personal autonomy and pluralism. In the United States, the picture is more complex. While there's also a rise in the known-as, those unaffiliated with any religion, the United States remains a generally more religious country than much of Western Europe. The growth of the Muslim community, driven by immigration and birth rates, is happening within this dynamic American religious marketplace. For many immigrants, faith is a crucial part of their identity and a source of community in a new land. Mosques become vital centers for social cohesion, cultural preservation, and of course, spiritual practice. The repurposing of churches into mosques in the United States can be seen as a micro-example of these larger shifts. It reflects a society where religious demographics are actively changing, and where different faith communities are carving out their space. Meanwhile, in Europe, the creative reuse of churches for secular purposes underscores a continent grappling with its Christian heritage in an increasingly post-Christian era. Both scenarios highlight how profoundly cultural currents shape and are shaped by the religious life and physical structures of a society. It's a constant ebb and flow. Section 9. Conclusion. 2 continents, 2 trajectories, 1 evolving world. So, there you have it. On one side of the Atlantic, in the United States, we see a story of religious growth and vitality, particularly within the Muslim community. Mosques are increasing in number, often through new construction and sometimes by giving new spiritual purpose to former church buildings. This reflects a dynamic demographic, driven by immigration and community building, carving out its place in the diverse American religious tapestry. It's a narrative of expansion and adaptation in a country where faith continues to play a significant, albeit evolving, public role for many. Then we look to Europe, and the narrative shifts dramatically. Here we witness the receding tide of traditional Christianity. Empty pews, church closures, and a growing secular populace are reshaping the continent's spiritual and physical landscape. The grand churches that once dominated city skylines and village squares are increasingly falling silent or being transformed into everything from skate parks and libraries to supermarkets and luxury apartments. This reflects a deep societal move away from institutional religion, driven by a complex mix of historical, cultural, and social factors. These are not isolated incidents, but interconnected parts of a global story about faith, culture, and change. The rise of mosques in America and the repurposing of churches in Europe are visible markers of much deeper transformations. They speak to shifting demographics, evolving belief systems, and the constant renegotiation of religion's place in public life. They also highlight different societal approaches to religious pluralism and heritage. One continent sees new sacred spaces emerge, while the other seeks new uses for old ones. Ultimately, this tale of two continents underscores the fluid nature of religious landscapes. Nothing stays static. Communities grow and shrink, beliefs evolve, and the buildings that house our spiritual aspirations adapt accordingly. Understanding these trends, the mosque boom in the United States, the church repurposing in Europe, gives us a clearer view of how our world is changing. It's a complex, ongoing process, and these shifts in bricks and mortar are really just the surface of a much deeper human story of faith, identity, and the search for meaning in an ever-evolving world.